Despite being one of the richest countries in the world, Saudi Arabia still often receives intense criticism for human rights violations. Their laws are very strict and come with heavy penalties, including the death sentence and various forms of physical punishment as part of their legal system. It's really important to understand the laws of the region and their culture in order to better comprehend these kinds of punishments. That's why in this video we will discuss these punishments in more detail to give you a clearer and more complete perspective about our topic. So for now, join us as we discuss the 10 most severe punishments in Saudi Arabia. But before we start, if you're new to our channel, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. Number 10. Punishment for apostasy. 10 in Saudi Arabia, what is called apostasy or abandoning one's religion, especially Islam, is still considered a crime under their strict Islamic law. For many years, the authorities have punished people who abandon their faith with severe penalties. According to them, leaving Islam is considered a threat to national identity and social unity in a country with deep religious beliefs. And although the death penalty for apostasy is now rare, there are still other severe punishments such as public flogging and long imprisonment for those proven guilty. Human rights groups repeatedly emphasize that punishing a person for deeply choosing or rejecting a religion is against international standards and human rights, especially the freedom of conscience and belief. On the other hand, Saudi officials defend the laws against apostasy. According to them, this is important to preserve Islamic traditions and the unity of the country. Because Saudi Arabia is considered the birthplace of Islam, openly renouncing the religion or spreading atheist ideas is seen as undermining the foundation of the kingdom. However, for critics, a truly stable society does not need to criminalize thought and belief. They believe that religious institutions need to change and become more open to acceptance. There are also growing calls to allow non-Muslims to conduct private worship. Some of these calls even come from within the royal family, while some conservatives oppose the rapid changes. Practical leaders recognize that adapting to a more open and diverse world requires more flexible policies and greater freedom in people's spiritual choices. In this era of globalization, where it is difficult to control people's thoughts, embracing diversity may be a more stable and long-term solution for the future. 9. Punishment for homosexual act. In Saudi Arabia, same-sex relationships are strictly prohibited under their conservative Islamic laws. Those proven to be involved in this kind of relationship may be punished with imprisonment, physical punishment, and, in some cases, even the death penalty. Consensual same-sex relationships are considered a crime under Sharia law. Certain types of acts are classified as adultery or sodomy, which carry severe punishments. And although cases classified as such are rare, flogging and long imprisonment are still commonly imposed instead of the death penalty. Human rights organizations around the world strongly condemn these kinds of punishments. According to them, this violates the right to private life, dignity, health, and freedom from violence. Because of this, many members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus community live in fear, discrimination, and oppression. Many also experience depression and negative things because of the stigma in the law. Experts also add that homosexuality has long existed in different cultures and periods throughout history. That is why persecution of this is considered outdated and unreasonable. The United Nations has also called for the legalization of same-sex relationships and the protection of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus rights in Saudi Arabia. Although there is strong opposition from conservatives, progressive groups hope that the time will come when society will become more open and discrimination will disappear. 8. Punishment for witchcraft and sorcery. Saudi Arabia is among the few countries in the world that continue to punish those accused of witchcraft and sorcery. Under their religious law, anyone proven to be involved in activities related to magic or cults may be punished with imprisonment, flogging, or even death. Complaints usually come from ordinary people, such as accusing a neighbor or acquaintance of making amulets, fortune-telling, or offering magical wishes. If the accusations are proven during the investigation, the accused may be detained for a long time or punished in public, and in some rare cases, there are people who are executed because of witchcraft charges. Human rights groups strongly oppose this kind of law, and according to them, it is truly unreasonable to punish actions that have no scientific basis. The United Nations has also called for an end to the use of vague accusations of witchcraft against minorities and non-religious people. Although officials defend the crackdown against fraudsters, activists say that these cases often stem from personal grudges, envy, and false beliefs. Critics believe that clearer laws, fair trials, and humane punishments are needed to prevent abuse. Number 7. Criminalizing ATK scene. In Saudi Arabia, being an atheist or not believing in God is considered a crime. The law prohibits denying or criticizing the core teachings of Islam, which are the foundation of the country's identity as the birthplace of this religion. Under the 2014 terrorism law, spreading atheist ideas can be punished with long-term imprisonment. In addition, there are other laws against blasphemy and apostasy that make it even more difficult for non-believers to express their views. Because of this, people really have almost no freedom to question, doubt, or express alternative beliefs about religion. The human rights group also criticized this policy because it violates the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. Amnesty International is calling for the removal of all laws that punish atheism and for respect for free thought. On the other hand, officials say that protecting Islamic values is more important than individual freedom. However, according to critics, an open and vibrant society requires acceptance of different perspectives and beliefs. They suggest that open, respectful discussions about religion and faith are better than punishment. That's it. 6. Discriminatory punishment for women. For many decades, the justice system of Saudi Arabia has been heavily criticized for punishments that are extremely discriminatory and specifically targeted against women. This includes public flogging for inappropriate behavior, mingling with men without permission, and imprisonment for disobeying the men who have authority in their lives. These punishments reflect the deeply patriarchal views and double standards regarding gender that have long existed in the country's conservative society. Religious courts held great power back then and controlled almost every aspect of women's lives, from education to travel. In order to enforce adherence to tribal traditions that were often disguised as religious commandments, by using intimidation and harsh punishments, women's freedom and autonomy are suppressed to maintain male domination, especially at a time when old customs are beginning to be challenged. This kind of systematic injustice has also been condemned by human rights organizations, both local and international. According to them, these punishments do not come from true Islam, but from wrong interpretations and oppressive culture. They also added that suppressing half of the population also hinders the development of the entire country. In recent years, there have also been some positive changes. Because of stronger advocacy and changing perspectives, men's control over women's education, work, travel, and public presence has lessened. Women have gained more opportunities, and the threat of severe punishment for minor mistakes is also gradually decreasing. And although the problem of gender-based violence still remains, society's acceptance of it is decreasing. Rights groups recognize the reforms, such as the abolition of the male guardianship system, but they insist that changes in the law are not enough. Society's mindset also needs to change. Number 5. Punishment for blasphemy. In Saudi Arabia, any act or statement considered blasphemy against God, the Quran, Prophet Muhammad, or Islam is strictly punished. The punishments include long imprisonment, painful flogging, and in some cases, the death penalty. For a country with deep faith, protecting the sanctity of religion is truly considered important. Almost all statements, expressions, or actions that may be considered insulting to the sacred symbols and customs of Islam fall under the claw of blasphemy laws. These laws are also used against atheists, former Muslims, and people of other faiths in the name of maintaining religious integrity. Because of this, free discussion and progressive thinking within Islam are hindered. According to human rights groups themselves, These laws violate international rights to freedom of speech, thought, and religion. The United Nations also mentioned that imprisoning people who question or criticize religious doctrine is unjust. Aside from this, the definition of blasphemy is also very vague, making it easy to abuse against critics, minorities, and reformists. There are also many cases said to have flawed processes, relying on forced testimonies and coerced confessions. On the other hand, the government defends these punishments as a way to prevent the spread of immoral and destructive ideas. Although major reforms seem unlikely due to the resistance of conservatives, some hope that with time and modernization, society will become more open. Optimists believe that the time will come when ethics will be valued more than dogma, and the country will align with international standards of human rights. 4. Punishment for drug trafficking. Saudi Arabia enforces some of the strictest laws against illegal drugs in the world. Under their zero-tolerance policy, those involved in drug trafficking and selling can face long imprisonment, flogging, heavy fines, and, in serious cases, even the death penalty. Because of the country's location near regions with conflicts, it often becomes a route for international drug smuggling. In response, the authorities implemented a strict campaign against drug trafficking, using harsh punishments and extensive surveillance. The possession or sale of illegal substances carries heavy penalties, ranging from several years in prison to decades of incarceration. The death penalty also remains in place for major drug traffickers and repeat offenders. The government enforces its strict policy, which they say is important to protect public health and the stability of society against international drug syndicates. However, human rights groups strongly criticize this system. According to them, this has not completely solved the problem with illegal drugs, but instead only fills the prisons with small-time users and couriers. In addition, there are very few programs for rehabilitation and treatment. So many inmates repeatedly return to their vices. There are also calls for more humane policies, including viewing addiction as a health issue and not just a crime. Now, the United Nations is calling for a clearer distinction in penalties between large syndicates and those who are only pushing drugs for their own addiction. And although quick reforms are difficult because of religious beliefs, some hope that over time the system will become more balanced and humane. Number 3. Punishment for treason. In Saudi Arabia, treason against the state is considered one of the most serious crimes. Anyone accused of involvement in espionage, sabotage against the government, or conspiracy against the country may be punished with long imprisonment or even death. For the monarchy, protecting national security against both internal and external threats is a top priority. That is why the government justifies strict punishments as a way to counter anything that could cause chaos and destabilization. However, the charge of treason is also reportedly used against critics, activists, and reformists who criticize the government and the royal family. According to reports, the accused often do not have adequate legal representation, and there are cases of forced confessions obtained through intimidation or torture. Many trials are also conducted in secret, and some executions are carried out after a swift and non-transparent process. This has brought real international criticism to the country. Experts also point out that even in cases involving state security, due process, the rule of law, and human rights should still be respected. The United Nations is calling for the implementation of a clearer appeal system, transparency, and accountability to prevent abuse of power. And although change seems slow, reform advocates are hopeful that as time passes and Saudi Arabia's relations with the world improve, it will be compelled to implement a fairer system. Number 2. Unlawful detention. For many years, human rights organizations have repeatedly released reports about the widespread illegal detention or torture of suspects in Saudi Arabia. Many of those arrested on suspicion of involvement in terrorism or being a threat to national security are detained for a long time without clear charges, without a lawyer, or without contact with their families. Because of this, it becomes easy to violate their rights without accountability. According to a former detainee, they experienced severe torture, and everything was done to force them to confess. Sometimes the authorities justify this method as a necessary investigation against extremists. However, human rights groups strongly condemn such actions because no reason can justify torture and the violation of human dignity. The use of secret detention to force confessions and avoid accountability undermines public trust and the credibility of the government. Under international pressure, Saudi Arabia implemented some limited reforms such as recording arrests and allowing controlled family visits. However, for us experts, this is not enough. There is still a need for deep and systematic reforms to ensure transparency, accountability, and the protection of the rights of all detainees. Human rights advocates are hoping that over time, and with the increasing influence of international standards, the country will be compelled to change these practices. In this regard, 1. Criminalization of dissent and activism. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has faced even more criticism because of its intensified crackdown on critics, activists, reformists, and the opposition. Using broad and vague definitions of terrorism and sedition, the authorities consider even peaceful criticism as a crime with severe punishment. The punishments range from fines and travel bans to long-term imprisonment, corporal punishment, and in some cases, the death penalty. Because of this, many people are truly afraid to speak out and express their opinions. From human rights activists, writers, economists, to religious scholars, many have become victims of repression. Even on social media, those who express their opinions are not safe. Many bloggers and netizens have been arrested for criticizing the government. Because of fear, many are forced to remain silent and practice self-censorship. According to human rights groups, the true strength of a nation comes from open and inclusive governance, not from repression. The closing of space for discussion and participation only leads to anger and tension that may erupt in the future. They are calling for gradual democratization, allowing peaceful activism, and strengthening civil society. Although there is strong opposition from some sectors of power, more practical leaders recognize that the people's desire for representation and freedom cannot be stopped forever. As the world continues to watch Saudi Arabia's human rights record, it's not far-fetched that the time will come when the country will choose dialogue over punishment. Number 0. Capital punishment. Saudi continues to implement the death penalty as the heaviest punishment for crimes such as murder, repeated theft, and many others. Crimes such as apostasy and same-sex relationships were also previously punishable by death, although there have been no recorded executions for these in recent years. The usual method of execution in the country is public beheading with a sword. From 2007 to 2020, around 700 people were executed for various cases. However, there has been a noticeable decrease in the number of executions in recent years. In the past, public executions were carried out as a means of intimidation and warning to the public. But nowadays, this is being avoided due to growing controversy and criticism from other countries. Although many Muslim countries have the death penalty, Saudi Arabia stands out because of its high number of executions. The government defends the death penalty as part of Sharia law and as a way to prevent the most dangerous crimes. However, human rights organizations repeatedly emphasize the problems with fair trials, especially for migrant workers who often receive harsher punishments. Many also consider public beheading as cruel and inappropriate in modern society. It is very difficult to change this system because of the influence of conservative religious leaders who strongly defend the death penalty as part of Islamic law. However, some positive changes have also occurred. In recent years, the death penalty is no longer automatically imposed for certain crimes, and the execution of minors has been completely banned. Judges have also been given more authority to consider mitigating circumstances before handing down a sentence. In addition, Saudi Arabia is facing increased scrutiny from the international community, especially because of its ambition to strengthen relations with other countries. Although the country is not yet ready to completely abolish the death penalty due to religious beliefs, the gradual reduction in its use shows that it does not want to be left behind in terms of international human rights standards.